what's going on, everybody? It's Rich Perez welcoming you back into another dose of the rundown. Of course, with me as always, my co-host Kayson Davis, and we have a special guest in the building covering the Oklahoma City Thunder for The Athletic, Mr. Erik Horne.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming on. Well, my first question, let me turn that down. My first question for you, I know you when you were coming out of college, I believe you covered like a variety of different things. You know, how did your journey start into to the journalism field, and how did you end up covering basketball and then the Oklahoma City Thunder?
Wow. Oh man, that's a long one. I took the long route. And it's right for some people. It's not for others. But I went to school in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to Oglethorpe University, a small liberal arts school on the north side of Atlanta. And my senior year, I really got started late, and I should have started a lot earlier in terms of looking for internships. And for anybody out there, the first thing I would say is as soon as you get on campus, or even before you get on a campus, start looking for places that you could possibly be an intern and write as much as possible early in your career, because I didn't do that. But my senior year, about halfway through, I was like, I got to get serious about my life. So I started looking for internships, and there was a newsletter in town called Score Atlanta, and they were basically just looking for people to write. And, it was free. I wasn't working for anything, but it was just an opportunity to get a byline. And I was just, I just went in and applied for that, and I started working for this weekly newsletter that was basically a bunch of us young guys just working for the privilege of being able to go to high school sports and college and pro sports in Atlanta. And we were doing it for nothing, man. And I was just going to high school games, and I got the opportunity to kind of work my way up to a part-time position. And eventually, I was an editor, had interns, got to cover the Hawks and the Falcons a little bit. And that allowed for me to kind of build my resume to the point to where I could send it out to a couple of different places. And then I ended up getting a job in Ardmore, Oklahoma, which is really kind of the middle of, I wouldn't say the middle of nowhere, but it's close to it. Kind of halfway between Oklahoma City and Dallas. And I worked at that small paper for 5 years. And then I went to National Association of Black Journalists Convention, which I would highly recommend anybody go to if they want to, touch base with people in the business and kind of make connections and friends for life. That's really where my career took off, because I was there for a couple of days in Orlando in 2013, and then I met a few people, and next thing I know, I was getting emails from the sports editor at the time of the Oklahoman. And that's how I got to the Oklahoman, started working as a web editor there. And then after a couple of years of working as a web editor, I was kind of given the opportunity to switch roles with one of our beat writers for the Thunder. And I covered the Thunder for the Oklahoman for, I think, 4 years before making the switch to the Athletic in 2019. So it's kind of a long journey, man. I know that was long-winded, but it kind of shows that it's not a direct route to getting to cover the NBA. It takes a little time. That entire little story I just told was over the process of, probably I'd say 13 or 14 years. So it's not something that happened in 2 years or 3 years, and it wasn't something that was easy. I put in a lot of work. I got to know the right people, and I made a lot of connections and partnerships that have lasted me throughout that time. But it's been worthwhile, man. It's been a fun journey.
Well, you said something. Excuse me. You said something actually interesting that I kind of relate to a little bit. I'm a recent graduate myself with a communications degree. Kind of with the whole COVID-19 situation, it's been a little tougher, but I've also had trouble kind of finding internships and ways to kind of break in. Do you have any other advice for people like me, or just anybody going through that?
I think the current group of of young journalists, I think, have the right idea. You know, you guys have the right idea with this podcast to start with. You know, just being ambitious enough to reach out to people, I think, is a big thing. When I was younger and in school, I was kind of gun shy, man. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself or my abilities until I got later on in my career. So I think, first of all, you guys are doing a great job just doing this, reaching out to me, reaching out to other guys in the basketball community, and making it known that y'all want to do work and y'all are willing to put in the hours to do it, no matter how many people see it. And getting the repetitions necessary, you know, to be good at what you do. I think that that's an important thing too. And the second thing is just, you know, something my dad taught me. I thought it was corny at the time. You know, you have all these adults telling you all this crap when you're growing up and you don't listen to it, but then you get older and you're like, dang, these people were like spitting some serious game at you, like meet and greet. My dad was always telling me meet and greet, press flesh. That means like shake hands. We can't shake hands anymore because of COVID, but, you know, dap people up. Like, just make a point every day or take time out of your day to help yourself in your career every day. I know we get kind of bogged down in the day-to-day stuff and kind of doing our daily work and our routine, but I didn't do that enough when I was younger. I didn't take enough time to take time every day to make sure that I was keeping up with the people I needed to, that wouldn't forget about me when it came time to think about a certain job or to think about, you know, if this person is somebody who'd be interested in this position or that position, or even somebody that could, you know, just come on your podcast. So when somebody else hears your voice or somebody else continues to hear your name ring out, they'll say, oh yeah, that guy does good stuff, or I'm interested in that guy that jumped on this podcast or that podcast. So I think the biggest thing for this generation is you got to continue to be open to meeting people, be gracious. Don't ever expect anything from people, but at the same time, always be ready and willing to communicate with people and ask them how you can help them, and like not ask for jobs necessarily, but at the same time, don't be afraid to say, look, I'm good at this and this is what I do and this is what I have done and this is how I can help somebody. So I think that if I'd have done those things, like some of the things that you guys are doing now when I was younger, I'd probably be even farther along in my career at an earlier juncture.
Yeah. I think that's good advice because I go to Miami now and they're kind of big on networking out there and stuff too. So, yeah, as you can see, I'm a huge Thunder fan. But before we get into the Thunder, I wanted to talk about did you play sports growing up, kind of? And if you did, what sports did you play?
Yeah, I was like, I was baseball and soccer. I actually went to Oglethorpe and played soccer there. It was Division III, so we didn't have scholarships. But like soccer was my passion. You know, I got into it when I was 8 years old. I always loved it. I loved baseball growing up. Like, you know, I was a big Braves fan. My dad's from Atlanta, so I grew up in New Orleans, but I grew up, you know, in New Orleans, there was only the Saints. That's it. So we didn't have the Hornets back then or the Pelicans or whatever. So I was like a big like Bulls fan because of Michael Jordan. And then the Braves with Chipper Jones, Andrew Jones, Fred McGriff, Maddox, Smoltz, all those guys. But soccer was like really what caught me. I think like 94 World Cup was like big for me. And I just started following soccer from then on. And it's kind of become my passion and my love. I'm kind of glad I don't cover soccer because I think it would kind of like taint it for me. It can kind of still be this thing to the side that I like really appreciate. So yeah, those are like my things. I played basketball like 2 years in middle school, and our teams were terrible, man. We were awful. So like, I was the point guard, and I wasn't very good. I was probably more of like a combo guard. I probably had a high usage. I probably didn't pass very much because my teammates weren't very athletic. But, you know, I probably need to think about that more when I write about and critique some of these guys because I probably wasn't a very good point guard back in the day.
Yeah. You said you covered the NFL and NBA in Atlanta. Would you rather cover football or basketball? Do you have like a preference? Do you?
You know, it's like I don't really like. I've gotten to cover basketball so much now that I think I really love the NBA, but I wouldn't say that I have like a preference necessarily. I really love football. I love all levels of football, college or pro. You know, I don't like that the way probably over the past like 10 years that the NFL has marketed itself and it's kind of dealt with some of the PR, whether it's the Ray Rice stuff or any of the kind of just negative PR we're seeing now from the Daniel Snyder situation and the Redskins. So that's kind of a thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about the NFL and the way they go about their business. I don't think that they're appreciative of their athletes the way that the NBA is, particularly the black athlete. I think that they go neglected, and that's just kind of the nature of the sport too, because the NFL is just not guaranteed contracts, and it's kind of just guys are more like pieces of meat, except the quarterback, so to speak. But I think I'd probably say I'd prefer the NBA. And, you know, when I was in Atlanta, that's kind of when the Hawks were just getting going with Joe Johnson and Josh Smith and Josh Childress and some of those guys. And it was really exciting to be around that when it was starting to get cracking. So I think the NBA is probably a little bit higher for me. What about y'all? I mean, obviously you guys are NBA fans, so you like the NBA more than the NFL?
Yeah, I think, well, for me anyway, I can't speak for Kayson. I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you when it comes to how the NBA's marketed itself in terms of well, not in terms, but as opposed to what the NFL, even the MLB has done. I think they're just kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to everything that's thrown their way, even the way that they've handled this whole COVID-19 situation. Obviously, it's not perfect, but the way that they've been able to put the Orlando bubble together is just something that I haven't seen from the NFL. And obviously the NFL's got some time, but you know, I believe they're still planning on taking trips out. I know the MLB is doing that right now. They've got some training, some spring training games going on right now. But that for me, like when I look at the way the NBA treats their players as opposed to the other leagues and everything else, it's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, for me, it's basketball, but it's because I've been playing basketball since I was like 5. I've been playing basketball kind of all my life, and I was always just like a basketball guy. Like even like my older brothers and stuff used to be like, "Oh God, he has no basketball all day," and they try to change the channel and stuff. So I always kind of been the basketball person. So it's basketball for me.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Like y'all said, I think the NBA's got a lot of things going for it that the other two sports really don't right now in terms of the visibility and the voices of the athletes. And you know, it's a good time for them. I mean, it's not a great time for any of these sports because we just don't know what the future of any of it's going to be when it comes to COVID and fans returning to sports, because that's so important in terms of the revenue and how much these sports are able to do because they rely so much on ticket sales. But I think that the NBA is in a good spot because you have so many stars that have so many strong voices and so many big brands, whether it's LeBron or Kyrie or Kevin Durant or Steph. It's just a really strong brand right now in terms of like just name and face recognition in terms of some of these guys.
All right. Well, speaking of, you know, this whole COVID-19 situation, obviously we're getting, you know, things started back up again. Teams are in Orlando right now, training and everything. For you as a journalist, you know, how's it been being able to cover this? You know, has it been tough on you? Have you found a way to adapt? You know, what are some of the things that you're doing right now to be able to cover the Oklahoma City Thunder?
Yeah, it's hard, man. You know, when you're used to a routine of seeing those guys every day or being around the team every day, it's challenging. You know, like it's you know, you miss being out in the road on particular because those are instances where you can get time to sit down and really talk and kind of get to know guys a little bit better. And I don't know, it's going to be hard to envision covering professional sports the same way ever again because, you know, you need that locker room access. You need that time before games to be able to go up to guys and just talk about life. I had the privilege of, you know, having my first child earlier this year, and he's beautiful little baby boy, man. He's 6 months old now, but like that was something that like I could talk to those guys about in pregame, and it really helped me in terms of creating connections. And it's like I didn't have a baby to create connections with guys, you know, obviously, but like it was one of these things that's the kind of stuff that helps you to get closer to guys is when you can open up yourself a little bit and you know, be able to create those connections. I don't know how much of that we're going to have going forward because of COVID. because of the, even when the season shut down, we were starting to see a little bit of that. We were starting to see social distancing, shutting down the locker rooms. And it's really hard. I mean, particularly the way that we've handled the virus as an entire country, it's going to be hard for me to imagine where covering teams on a daily basis is going. It requires more work, on your end, more kind of commitment and diligence, waking up every day and making sure you're calling the people you need to call, and using the relationships you've already built to kind of make your coverage sing in a way that you don't need to be there every day around those guys. So it's a challenge for sure, but it's not impossible. Like, we're still doing great work at The Athletic. I think there are a lot of journalists all over the country that are still doing great work. As you saw, the Washington Post just had their great story on the Redskins and all the tomfoolery that's going on there. It's just disgusting. But that's not a situation where those people were able to get access and be around a lot of people. They were able to rely on the contacts and the sources that they had. So you can still do good journalism in this climate, but it's challenging, and it's going to be challenging going forward to build those face-to-face relationships.
And the first game, well, not the first, the game that kind of shut everything down was actually Oklahoma City versus Utah. Were you around at that time when that happened? And if you were, what was everything like when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I was dead center, man. Oklahoma City is one of the few places in the league that still has kind of courtside seats for reporters. Maybe I think Dallas, Memphis, Phoenix, Oklahoma City are the ones with like the sideline seats. So we're like a couple rows back from center court. And all of this was happening right in front of me, basically. You see the Thunder's team doctor run out, and he's talking to the officials. And then their assistant general manager runs out, and everybody's talking. And the game's about to tip off, and you're thinking to yourself, like, this isn't normal. This isn't something that usually happens before a game. So, as soon as everybody comes running over and it's taking longer than usual for them to get out for the tip, you start to think, okay, there's a possibility that this thing could get delayed at the least. But you never thought that they would completely shut the game down. You thought it would be a situation where there might be a delay, they'd figure it out, then we'd all go back out there, everybody would warm up again, and we'd play. Because they got all these people in the building too. And, that was probably the most stunning thing is, they made all those people go home. It was like, wow, these people are going to be mad. But it wasn't even a situation where everybody was upset necessarily. I just think that most of the people that were there were stunned. They'd never been through anything like that before. And I'd never been through anything like that before as a journalist.
Yeah. I don't think any of us kind of been through that, even kind of watching it on TV, because I was about to watch the game, I guess, before it happened. So what was a couple months after that, kind of, I guess, leading up to now, like trying to figure out where we're going to have a season, where we're not going to have the season? Like, how was it trying to find stuff to write about at that time?
You just kind of get with your editors and people you work with and try to figure out what's the best way to go forward. You lean on some of the things that you've done in the past. It kind of turned into an early summer, really. So you started thinking about some of the summer coverage stuff you've done before. We started thinking about, playoff preview stuff potentially. You think about angles around that game. I wrote a story where I reached out to some guys who knew the Thunder's head of their head medical guy, Donnie Strack, and they knew him from previous stops that he'd been. So I wrote a story about, how this guy was uniquely prepared for that kind of moment. It's thinking about different ways to cover the game without having to be at the game. And we all obviously love watching the game, and that's the most important part of it. But, you can still evaluate a team even when you're not having a game night to night. And it allows for a little bit more kind of creativity and bandwidth with going after some stories. I did a scouting series where, I talked to a lot of scouts that I talked to throughout the league, throughout the year, and kind of got them to give their assessment of some of the Thunder's young players, because people love reading about the Thunder's young players and where those guys are going. So I kind of did a series on that and how, how those guys are progressing, what scouts see as some of their strengths and weaknesses. Got into a lot of film on that, breaking that down, and some of the statistics behind that. So that was kind of cool, too, to kind of be able to take a step back and do some more deep dive stuff instead of having to kind of do the day-to-day stuff that I'm usually doing.
Yeah. And you say you've been at the Oklahoma since 2013?
Yeah, I started at the Oklahoman, and I moved to the Athletic in 2019. So I was at the Oklahoman for 4 years. Actually, I was at the Oklahoman for, when I started there, 2013, I was there for 6 years, and then this is my first year with the Athletic. But I covered the Thunder for 4 of my 6 years at the Oklahoman. So my first year covering the Thunder was Kevin Durant's last year in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, so you kind.
No, go ahead, Kayson.
So you kind of been there for a while. Do you have like a favorite team to cover that you covered during like one of those years?
Oh man. I wish I had the understanding and knowledge and appreciation now that I did in 2015-16, Durant's last year, because that was probably the best team they've ever had, and I was just kind of a fish out of water, just like I didn't know what was going on. The playoffs were fast. I was just like, I was like, oh man, it's so fast. And I was just trying to survive every night, basically. Like, I remember when I first started covering the beat, I was terrified. And I lost a lot of weight, man, because I wouldn't eat at games because I thought I was going to get sluggish. So I didn't eat before the games. So I was always just nervous because I was scared to write. I was scared to, like, try to tell people what I see because I didn't trust myself because I hadn't watched enough basketball. I hadn't watched the team enough. It wasn't my job. Like, it was just before it was kind of like it was a hobby. I was almost like a fan, so to speak. I was watching Durant's MVP season. And I was like rooting for that guy. I was like, yeah, this is awesome to watch when you're not totally invested in it every night. But then you start to cover it and you have to be objective, and it's scary, man. It's really scary. So I didn't trust myself then, and I was like making myself sick. And I think that, looking back on it, that was an incredible team, man. They beat the 67-win Spurs in the playoffs. They beat them bad. They had the Warriors, and I tell people to this day, they had the Warriors at the weakest we've ever seen the Warriors at full strength. I know the Raptors just beat the Warriors, but that was the Warriors that were injured and coming off of, a 3 or 4 year run where they were playing 100 games a year. That Warriors team was a 73-win team, and the Thunder were making them look weak, man. I mean, it was incredible to watch how good that team was, how many different styles they could play. They could play any style of ball. And that was the only season I got to see Durant consistently night after night. And I tell you, man, that dude's a privilege to watch. Like, he's one of the greatest basketball players we've ever seen. And I told him when he went to Golden State, I remember the first time I saw him after he went to Golden State and I was in Oakland. I told him, like, hey, man, like, I'm not even, like, disappointed with what you did. Like, I understand that people have decisions to make about their life, but, like, I'm disappointed that I don't get to see you play every night anymore, because that shit was fun. It was, like, to watch that dude work, man, it was really fun. And you can say the same about Westbrook too, man. Like, to watch that guy go, him and Kevin together, like, the way that they would just put teams away, it was special, man. So probably 15, 16, that's my long-winded answer.
That's a lot to take in.
Wait. Let me ask this question. So, would you take that team over the 2012 team that made it to the finals?
Yeah, because they're more experienced. I think you had some circumstances that sucked for that team because Kevin was in his free agency year, and I think that he had a lot on his mind in terms of that. That was difficult to deal with. But that 15-16 team was probably just as good defensively, if not better. I'd probably say they were better. And when I think about it and I look back on it, they kind of coasted through the regular season. They were to the point, I think they went 55-27 in Kevin Durant's last year. They were to the point to where they really were screwing around in some of those games that year, because I think that they knew that they didn't have to go hard every night in order to get wins. But that team had Serge Ibaka, who could guard anybody. You had Andre Robertson, who could guard 4 positions. You had Kevin Durant, who could guard 4 or 5 positions. You had Westbrook, who could do the same when he was locked in defensively. You had Waiters coming off the bench, who probably played the best basketball of his career that year. You had Enes Kanter, who could come off the bench and get 15, 17 points on a minimal amount of shots if you wanted to go big. Steven Adams had really good athleticism, and he was big for them in the playoffs. They could play any way. And I think that team, with that experience and the way that they kind of, frankly, embarrassed Golden State in those first 4 games of the series, I think that team would be a better team even against the team that had Harden, because Harden wasn't Harden yet. He was efficient, but he wasn't the Harden he is now. He wasn't step back 3 Harden. That guy wasn't there yet. So I think the 15-16 team was the best Thunder team that they've ever had.
I remember watching that playoff run that Oklahoma City had, and I just kept thinking to myself, like, it almost seems like it's destined for them to get back to the finals. Like, you mentioned how they really kind of embarrassed the Golden State Warriors, the 73-9 Golden State Warriors. At what point did it look like things were just starting to fall apart? Because they lost Game 5, but it seemed like everybody wasn't very worried. Like, Game 6 is back in Oklahoma City. They can close this thing out, and obviously that didn't happen.
It didn't look like that until the last probably 5 to 7 minutes in Game 6. Once they lost Game 6, you knew, like, all right, there's no way they're going to be able to go back to Golden State and win, because you can't give those guys second life and let them get back on their home floor. They were too good. There was clearly some fundamental flaws to that Thunder team. As good as they were, they just got tight when they were up against good teams in terms of their late game offense. They didn't really have a late game offense, and that was kind of the Achilles heel of the Thunder basically from their inception until Chris Paul came along. They just really struggled in late game offensive situations, and they relied too much on just isolation and hero ball. And they frankly, didn't have the firepower to be able to be that inconsistent in late game situations against a team like that. So it wasn't until Game 6, up until that point, even when they lost Game 5 in Oakland, you were like, okay, well, they'll come back to Oklahoma City, and they played an okay back and forth game, and then Andre Robertson gets 5 fouls, and he has to go out, I think, late in the third quarter, and he was the guy up to that point who had blocked Klay Thompson's shot 3 times in that game in Game 6. He was doing a really good job on him. And then Klay got hot when Robertson was on the bench to start the fourth quarter, and from then on, you were like, all right, we got a problem. So, and then y'all know the rest, man. Klay was Klay. He went off.
Yeah. So I guess you were only there for that last year, but I guess there's been a lot of speculation between why Kevin Durant left, and I know a lot of people think it's because of Russ. Do you from being there, that I guess just that 1 year, do you think that they really had a problem, or was it noticeable if it was there?
I think there was a lot of stuff that contributed to that, and I think that it was easy at the time to just all point at Russell Westbrook as the blame, but he wasn't the sole reason, and I don't think that he can be a guy that you can look at and be like, he's the reason that Kevin Durant left Oklahoma City. There were a lot of things going on. I think that the most important thing to remember about Kevin Durant is how old he was when he made that decision. I don't know how old you guys are. How old are you all, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 26.
Okay.
I just turned 24 yesterday.
Okay. So, Rich, I'll just take you as a 26-year-old. No offense, Kayson, but when you at the time you're at in your life right now, aren't the possibilities just kind of open and endless, and you just want to do as much possible, and you're kind of you're not set at 26. You're yo, I like anything's possible. Basically, as long as you don't have like kids and like a wife and like a mortgage at 26 years old, you feel like the world is in your hands. So you got to think about where Kevin Durant was. This is a guy who, for most of his life, has been kind of like a basketball nomad. He's never been in one place for a very long period of time. Like, he bounced around high schools. He went from Maryland to the University of Texas for school for 1 year. Then he went to Oklahoma, and he spent 8 years in Oklahoma. His formative year, correction, went to Seattle first, then to Oklahoma. He was in Seattle as an 18, 19-year-old. Then he drops into Oklahoma as a 20-year-old, and he spends his 20s in Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City is a great place if people actually live here and get to appreciate it. But to be a guy with a disposable income like him, to be on the top of the basketball world, and to be single, and to be 26, 27 years old, and the place you live most of your adult life is Oklahoma City, like, I think more than anything, Kevin just wanted to change the scenery. And I don't think that gets talked about enough in terms of his journey. And it just so happened that we had this crazy cap spike that allowed the best basketball team in the world to have all of this cap space. And Kevin is this guy who's a basketball junkie. He loves the game. He loves talking about the game. He loves playing the game. All he wants to do is hoop all the time. It hurts him when he can. So naturally, he wants to surround himself with the best basketball minds. And he already had great basketball minds around him, which I think is what upset a lot of people about why he left. He was with a great basketball player in Russell Westbrook. He was in a great team basketball player in Serge Ibaka. Steven Adams, a guy who would give anything. But when you have the opportunity to go play with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Draymond Green in this beautiful city, in this new atmosphere, after you've been 8 years in one place and you haven't been able to break through, I think that was really appealing to Kevin. And I think that was a time in his life where he wanted to try a different challenge. The way he did it upset a lot of people. But I don't think that – I think as time goes on, I think people come to understand that why he did it will make more sense. And I think that more than anything was the factor more than Russell Westbrook. I think that he and Russell were guys who respected each other's talents and they grew up together, but they were never like super tight. They were never like guys that hung out every single night or anything. They were guys who drove each other every day at the practice facility. They were guys who made each other better every single day. And I think that Kevin just wanted to seek a different challenge.
Well, I kind of want to get some clarification on you with his whole free agency thing. I remember back at that time, Royce Young had actually kind of, reported that it was looking like the possibility of him staying was very realistic. And then years later, Kendrick Perkins went on, I don't know if it was First Take or The Jump First, and, kind of echoed those same sentiments, but put more to the story, saying that him, Russell Westbrook, and Nick Collison had dinner the night before he had took the trip to the Hamptons and met with the Warriors, and basically, from his words, Kevin Durant let them know that he wasn't going anywhere. What were you hearing at that time? To kind of like let us know, was there any truth to any of that?
It was kind of like, I don't even know how much I was actually hearing about the specific details, like the dinners and all that stuff. They kept it pretty close to the vest. All the indications were like the Thunder felt that he was going to come back up until those last few days, because he went and took the meetings in the Hamptons. He didn't take a second meeting once he got back with the Thunder. I think they did kind of a walkthrough before he went out there. But, once he went out there and he didn't take he didn't come back with the Thunder and talk to them about it before he made his decision. I think that was kind of when they were like, okay, this is kind of this might be an issue here. We might lose this guy. But I think that's kind of the part that rubbed people the worst way, is that Kevin kind of sat down and had a dinner with those guys and wasn't completely forthright about what he was going to do. I think that kind of bothered people more than anything. And That is kind of unfortunate that it happened that way. I don't think that Kevin was ever like kind of straight up with those guys about his decision. But at the same time, I think that Kevin was I think he was also conflicted about what he wanted to do as well. He knew that if he sat down and he spent too much time with those guys, it was going to be more difficult for him to make a decision that was going to be life altering for everybody. And I don't like making excuses for a guy who's, won a bunch of championships and gone on to prosperity somewhere else and, did great things. Like, you don't need to make excuses for Kevin Durant, but it was also a difficult decision. So I kind of get why he would have some of the trepidation about facing those guys like Westbrook and Collison, but he probably would have went about it differently if he could have gone back and done it again. But that sometimes decisions like that come with maturity. You got to grow up and make mistakes before you can, figure out that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of wanted to get into the season with Melo, the kind of his 1 year there, and then the first year with Paul George. I guess a lot of people expected a lot from them coming into after they got Melo and stuff like that. What do you see? Because they went out to the Jazz in 6. So kind of what did you see throughout that year, and maybe in the playoffs, kind of just why they didn't be as successful as people thought they could be?
Well, the Melo thing was always going to be a difficult fit because you were trying to put together 3 guys who were really ball dominant with Melo and Westbrook and Paul George. And it was also the first year those guys were together. So they were all kind of adjusting to, having to make sacrifices. And it was really hard for 3 guys to make sacrifices who have all been number ones like that. And I think that they probably don't get as much credit as they deserve for being able to do that in the window of time that they had to do that. Because, if you remember the Melo trade was made basically, 2 days before training camp started. So the Thunder had gone into training camp with the impression that Patrick Patterson was going to be the starting power forward. And, basically that forced Billy Donovan to kind of basically throw everything away and kind of start over in terms of how everything's going to be distributed and having to work through man management and trying to figure out how to get all these guys to buy in. So the big thing for the Thunder that year was, the defensive part of it. They were finally starting to look like a really devastating team because Andre Robertson was playing unbelievable ball, and he was a defensive player of the year candidate. And because they were able to force so many turnovers, they were able to get so many transition points that it kind of made up for some of the shortcomings they had in the half-court offense. But once Robertson got hurt and you had to shift how you're playing defensively, you got to play more Terrence Ferguson. You got to play more Paul George on ball instead of having Paul George off the ball, kind of playing free safety and getting a bunch of steals off ball. It kind of changed their defensive structure, and it also changed their offensive structure because they're not able to get out on the fast break as much because they're not creating as many turnovers. And I think once you got them into a half-court offense, it was really hard, for them to generate points. One, because Russell Westbrook, high-usage guy, not a great jump shooter, so you can kind of pack the paint on him. And if you don't have, elite shooters spreading the floor, you might have a Paul George, but Melo wasn't an elite three-point shooter. Steven Adams isn't his game. Terrence Ferguson was a guy who that wasn't his game. He was a rookie, and then they brought in Corey Brewer, who he wasn't a great three-point shooter either. It just became easier for the Jazz to kind of pick them apart in that way. The Robertson injury was big, and I think that Melo unfairly kind of got blamed for a lot of the stuff that happened there. But the way that team was structured, I don't know how far they were going to get without having a really, really good defense that was causing a lot of turnovers.
It's funny you say that too, because I had actually wrote a piece going into the postseason about how I felt just kind of overall what they had looked like, especially how you mentioned sort of like towards the middle of the season, they really started to roll. Like I remember they had played Cleveland, beat them by something like 40 points or something like that. Had Robertson not gotten hurt, like do you feel like they really could have made a run at a title, or do you still think like the deficiencies that you mentioned were going to end up hurting them in the long run?
Yeah, I think it would have ended up hurting them anyway. I don't know if they would have gotten past whoever they would have played in the second round. I think it would have been the Rockets, maybe, because Utah ended up playing the Rockets. That would have been tough because you still would have had the spacing issues. You still would have been playing Robertson heavy minutes, and he wasn't a great shooter. Same with Steven Adams. Same with Melo. But it would have been interesting to see how throwing peak Andre Robertson and Paul George at James Harden would have worked. Because, man, those guys were a terror. Before Robertson got hurt, in the game he got hurt, I mean, they beat the brakes off the Pistons in that game. And I think they had won 7 in a row going into that game. So, I mean, they were playing some high-level ball, man. So I think it would have made the Utah series a lot more interesting, particularly since Donovan Mitchell, really hurt them. And I think you would have been able to stick Andre Robertson on him for a majority of those possessions. And he would have given Donovan Mitchell, who was a rookie at the time, some problems. But I don't think they would have gotten past the Rockets probably in the second round. But it was really unfortunate because I think they were really starting to play some good ball. And what it would have changed is it would have changed their seeding, I think. And that would have helped them for sure. Because if they had Robertson, I think they would have finished higher than I think they might have finished as the 6. No, they finished as the 5. So I think no, they were the 4. God,
I think they were the 4,
sorry,
and they played Utah as
a
a 5.
4, you're right. Because they got into the 4 really late, and then they had home court against Utah, and they didn't make it back to Oklahoma City for Game 7. So maybe they would have been able to push for the 3 if they had Robertson, and that might have changed things a little bit.
Yeah, I think the Robinson injury kind of hurt him not only that year, but the next year since we kind of haven't seen him on the court for a couple of years.
And it was big to their psyche, too. I was there that night when Robertson got hurt, and, I mean, you could just see it the way – and, they almost lost that game, and they were winning by a lot when he got hurt because those dudes just didn't want to play anymore, man. They watched this guy blow his knee out. They didn't want to play that game anymore, and it really hurt them. And it took them a long time to kind of adjust to losing this guy that was so important. And, Robertson had become a really integral part of that team, man. He was a guy who sacrificed a lot on defense to give those guys the energy to go hard on offense. So when they lost him, it was really like they lost a piece of their heart, so to speak. And it was hard for them to kind of get back to where they needed to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think losing him, like I said, for that year and then the next year kind of hurt him. I know Terrence Ferguson kind of stepped up in his second year kind of with Robertson out, but I think that year is kind of interesting too. I think when you think about PG's time there, it's kind of a bunch of what ifs because he hurts both of his shoulders when he's playing at MVP level, kind of going into the second half of the season that year, and then Robertson being out for those 2 years. So I think that can kind of change a lot that could have happened with them. Can you kind of talk about PG's time there and maybe what they could have did and just having him there and then his relationship with Russ and stuff like that?
Yeah, those guys had a good relationship. I mean, there was mutual respect there. And I think Paul George, has said it before that Russ was a big reason why he re-signed and he stayed. Circumstances changed and Paul and his people saw an opportunity for him to go to LA when I think that they kind of understood that thing was stagnating in Oklahoma City. But, it's really unfortunate because I thought that Paul George would have been a good guy for the Thunder to build around going forward. I think that for them to really take another step, they probably would have had to trade Russell and keep Paul because what you traded Russell, whatever you got back you'd be able to help build around Paul. And I think that you probably would have had more of an upside with that team because you would have had the ball in the hands of a guy who's just a more efficient shooter and decision maker than Russell. It's not that Russell's a bad player. Russell's a Hall of Famer. But there's some limitations to what he does. And you got to build – when you have Russell on your team, you kind of structure the entire team to what his strengths are. And that's what the Thunder tried to do in those years with Paul George. They tried to get on a run. And that kind of minimized some of their deficiencies in the half court, using Russell to get out and transition as much as possible, letting him grab the defensive rebound and get out and push the floor. And that's why they were one of the best transition teams in the league. But the big problem with Paul in that last year was obviously the injury, which he played. He played incredibly, even though he was injured for a lot of that time. I think it limited him a little bit on both ends, particularly later in the season. And the one thing that's going to kind of linger about Paul's time in Oklahoma City was he just wasn't very good in the playoffs. So he was fine against Portland. He wasn't very good in the last game against Utah. He was bad in the last game against Utah. And he probably would have wanted to see a little bit more dominance and assertion from a guy of his talent in those series. And I think that, that kind of era of Thunder basketball, it might unfortunately get remembered as like a kind of era where those guys kind of had a heightened sense of self. I think they thought they were better than they really were. But in the end, they were a pretty flawed team that, could have used obviously they could have used a little bit more shooting. They were relying on some guys that were young that weren't very good shooters. That's a personnel problem that goes to the front office. But, some of those guys, I don't think they took certain opponents very seriously, particularly when Carmelo Anthony was here. And it hurt them. It hurt them in terms of seeding. It hurt them in terms of their mentality. And, they probably should have achieved more, but they were still 48, 49 win teams. And, a lot of teams in the NBA can't say that they've even won 45 games back-to-back years consistently. I think Minnesota's won 45 games once in the past 10 years. And the Thunder have done that every year since, their second year in Oklahoma City. So, people look at it as kind of a disappointment because they didn't go farther, but I think as time goes on, they'll kind of appreciate, having those guys here. And then you were able to trade Paul George and get, the next generation with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all the draft picks too.
You said a couple of things that were pretty interesting to me. So I kind of have two questions for you. The first one was in terms of, you mentioned in the hypothetical scenario we'll go with of possibly trading Russell Westbrook to build around Paul George. Do you feel like that's a situation that he would have been happy with going forward? Because, you talked about him signing with Russ. No, you don't think so?
No, and I think and it's not that I know that the Thunder wanted to trade him, but I'm just looking at it like logically, like I'm playing armchair GM or whatever. Like if you wanted to build around Paul George, but the reason that Paul George is there is Russell Westbrook, then if you trade Russell Westbrook, that's a slap in the face of Paul George and his people and the sacrifices they made to re-sign with you.
Right.
So that wasn't going to work. For all the flaws that Russell brought to the table in certain instances, he is the reason that the Thunder were able to sustain their level of play post Kevin Durant.
Right.
He's the reason that they're going to be able to sustain it for the next however many years because he kept basketball alive in Oklahoma City after Kevin Durant left. And if all he had to do was go up to them and say, after Kevin Durant leaves, like, well, guys, trade me. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. And, they'd have blown it up and they'd have started over. But Russell doubled down and, he kind of lifted up an entire city after that happened. And, obviously the people of Oklahoma City are going to be forever grateful to him because he kept basketball alive here. And he's the reason they got Carmelo. He's the reason they got Paul George. And if you don't get those guys, you don't get to make trades to continue to keep your team viable. You don't get Dennis Schroeder without Carmelo Anthony. You don't get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and 5 first-rounders without Paul George. And you don't get Chris Paul and 2 first-round picks without Russell Westbrook. So, Russell Westbrook helped them rebuild their team, even if at the time that he was here, he probably wasn't thinking of that. But, it wouldn't have been able to happen. I don't think they would have been able to rebuild by trading Westbrook before Paul George. I think Paul George had to be the domino to fall before you could pull the trigger on Russell Westbrook.
The other thing too, going back a little bit, you mentioned Russ's deficiencies a little bit. I think we're all aware of what those are, but I've kind of talked to a lot of people. I know me and Kayson have had this conversation before. Me personally, I kind of feel like, and a lot of people in the media don't really give him credit for this, in terms of what a point guard is supposed to be. Orchestrating the offense, dishing out assists and everything. I feel like he's really like kind of been the definition of that for the last few years in his career. I think probably the first time I saw that was actually his last year playing with Kevin Durant. If I'm correct, he averaged double-digit assists that season. Do you feel like when we talk about things like that, do you feel like he gets an unfair, rap as a player? It gets too much blame for certain things that didn't go in favor of them. Like talking about like the Utah series and them losing. Like I remember that last game, the only thing a lot of people could talk about was how many shots he took. But if you go back and watch that game, I remember he's kicking it out to Paul George. Paul George is throwing the ball right back to him. He's kicking it out to Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony's throwing the ball right back to him. So just, with all that in mind, like what do you think of the rep that he's kind of taken over the last couple of years?
I think that Russell Westbrook is the most polarizing player. Should I say in NBA history? He's the most polarizing player of his generation because he brings so much to the table, but the things and the times and the places that he takes those things off the table are so glaring that you can't help but wonder if those things were polished, how the games would turn out differently. I can't help but think of the last 2 minutes of Game 6 where the Thunder turned the ball over 5 times in the last 2 minutes. Now, Kevin Durant turned the ball over in that instance too, but Russell Westbrook turned it over like 4 times. But when you go back and you look at this stuff, you're right. It's never as bad as it seems at the time. Like, I always think about Game 6 against Utah in that series. He took 19 three-pointers. That's ridiculous. He's never 19 pointers because he's not a good three-point shooter. But like you were saying, you look at Paul George's line in that game, I think he might have been 2 of 16. Oh, something like that. Something terrible. So, and Carmelo Anthony might have taken, 6 shots that entire game. Game 1 against Portland. That was probably the best game I've ever seen Russell Westbrook play from just a control standpoint. I think he might have had 2 turnovers in 38 minutes, double-digit assists. He was 50% from the floor, got to the line a ton, made his free throws, and Jeremy Grant and Terrence Ferguson made 1 3-pointer in between them. He was hitting those guys in the corners, and they just weren't making shots. So it's kind of this thing where people always want Russell Westbrook to be more than he is. They want him to be perfect. And part of that is he played with almost a perfect offensive player in Kevin Durant to where every time you looked at Russell, you were like, why can't he do it the way that Kevin does it? Well, nobody can do it the way that Kevin does it. Kevin's once in a generation. We've never seen anything like Kevin before. He's 7 foot who can cross a guy up and hit a 3. So it's like Russell could never win. And, I take some responsibility for that too, because I think that I kind of got disenfranchised with the Russell Westbrook experience because of how he treated us. And it should never be personal when you're covering a team. It's hard for it not to be, especially because Russell is so abrasive, but it should never be that way to where you can't see through the way that someone acts and just look at the game objectively. I think that for the most part I did, but I do admit that there were times where I was upset. I'd go home upset. I'd go home frustrated because this guy wasn't treating me like a human being. But a lot of people have not treated Russell Westbrook like a human being either. And I think time will be kind to Russell Westbrook in this sense. I think that people understand that the Thunder probably didn't do enough to give him guys around him post Kevin Durant. Now, it was difficult because of some of the cap constraints, but some of that was luck too. Some guys just didn't work out. Alex Abrines got hurt. Guys like Anthony Morrow didn't shoot very well. They had to trade for Paul George to get him some help. and that, in effect, you trade Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis, who are good young players. So there's always kind of a balance to like the Russell Westbrook criticism where it probably teeters too far to the side of this guy's a negative, because he's not a negative. They never won less than 45 games with Russell Westbrook except the first year they were here. So that guy's obviously a positive, and he's obviously a great player. I just think that, like, his personality sometimes can make it easy for people to criticize him. And, I mean, another thing that goes with it, too, is the decision-making. He has made some pretty questionable decisions in terms of his shot selection and when and why he's taking certain shots. But when you look at his game as a whole, I think there's going to be a greater appreciation for him after his career, particularly if he gets a title. I don't think he will. I don't think James Harden will, because I think the West is and the NBA is just kind of stacked against, that particular style of play. But I think in retrospect, we're going to understand that Russell Westbrook was kind of he was an iconic player that probably didn't get enough appreciation in his time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think something that he kind of alludes to all the time is like sometimes certain things get stuck with people. Like he said that. Well, he kind of came at Patrick Beverley when he said that people just label him a defender and people run with it. But I think in his earlier years, he kind of was a little bit of a ball hog, like people kind of called him. Yeah, but I think at that time, James Harden was kind of running the point late in games, and then Russ was kind of playing it too. So he was kind of put out there to score a little more. But I think after Harden got traded, that Russ became more of a passer and stuff like that. And I think people kind of just stuck with how he was younger, and that kind of label kind of got stuck on him. So I think that's something that's kind of been stuck with him. So do you think that's something that's possible?
Yeah, it's like, I think that people. I think it can be both. I think you can acknowledge that Russell Westbrook is a point guard who sets up his teammates and does a good job of facilitating. He does it in a different way. He does it, really by getting out in transition, pushing really hard, finding shooters in the corners. If the Thunder gets guys who can actually make corner threes, maybe we think a little bit differently about Russell Westbrook. But there's also the guy that you have to take into account that takes terrible shots early in the shot clock that are just inexplicable. And you're like, man, I wish you wouldn't do that with 5 minutes left in the game and like a 5-point game. You're taking a 27-foot shot where like y'all need to like get into like an offense. Y'all need to get into something, get an easier basket than that, get to the free throw line. So it's like, I do think that Russell Westbrook is a very good passer. I think he's a guy who does work to make his teammates better. But again, those shots at those inopportune times, some of those decisions that he makes at those inopportune times, that can kill your game management. And I think that that's something that's a big difference between him and a Chris Paul. And I'm not comparing the two and trying to get down the road of who's a better point guard or whatever. I'm not doing that today. We can do that on another podcast. What I'm saying is Chris Paul operates in a different way. Russell is all the way, go, go, go. But Chris Paul is one of the best, I think, guys in terms of pace and game management that we've seen. You can win both ways. We've seen it. We've seen Russell win 60 games in a season with the Thunder. His baseline has been 45 wins for, basically since his second season in the league. We've seen Chris Paul win a ton of games the way he does it too, slowing the pace down, getting the shot that he's going to try and get that elbow jumper every time he gets down the last 5 minutes of the game, and he's going to make it. So there are different ways to operate. I think that people are more attuned to the Chris Paul style because I just think it's safer. You feel more safe with Chris Paul because he's not going to crank up a 28-foot three-pointer in the last 5 minutes of the game where you're trying to nurse a lead. I think that's something that people are more comfortable with, and I bet that coaches are more comfortable with that too.
Well, I mean, you got something?
Yeah, and I got one more thing about just the Russ's time there. You kind of brought up a couple times now about the kind of pieces that was built around him after KD left. I know a lot of people complain that maybe there wasn't enough shooting around him and how Sam Presti kind of wanted to do. He kind of built it more with people kind of like Russ, more athletic people and things like that. Do you think that's a fair criticism maybe to Sam Presti and just maybe Russ didn't have the right pieces around him after KD left?
Yeah, and you can like kind of look at the way that like Houston's done it, for instance, like, and I mean, I think it can go a little bit of both ways too. And it sounds like a cop out when I say stuff like this, but there's nuance to all this stuff, man. It's not one way or the other. It's not Sam Presti's fault. It's not Russell Westbrook's fault that this stuff didn't work. Because they tried to put guys around him that could shoot. For instance, you got guys like Doug McDermott, Alex Abrinas, Victor Oladipo. These aren't guys who are terrible shooters. Like Doug McDermott's a high 30s, 40% three-point shooter. Alex Abrinas was supposed to be that guy. Sometimes the circumstances just don't work. Jeremy Grant turned into a 40% three-point shooter before they traded him, and that's a guy playing stretch four. So that was a valuable piece for them, a guy who could defend anybody and could also hit a corner three. So Russell Westbrook had guys around him that could shoot. I think part of it is, like, in certain instances, they didn't make shots. Like, you get to game one against Portland, you lose a 4 or 5 point game, and those guys go 1 for 13 or something like that from three. Like, some of that's just bad luck. But, on the other hand, you got a team like Houston who operate with a different kind of mindset than the Thunder. When something doesn't work, Houston will deconstruct their entire team and make it work to the guys that are there that are going to be the primary guys. Like, you got to get shooters around James Harden because he can create. You're able to recognize that PJ Tucker's a guy that you can turn into a corner 3-point shooter. You're able to recognize that you can play Robert Covington as your small ball 5 because you can get more shooting on the floor. And if you go, 5 out, then you don't have to worry about a center clogging up the lane because Russell Westbrook can just, get past his guy one-on-one because you've got 4 guys spreading the floor. The Thunder never went all in that style. And I don't think it's necessarily like that they didn't believe in Russell Westbrook. I think it's more so that the Thunder never believed in fully going in like on one dude. They didn't do that with Durant. Like, they just put a bunch of like really versatile pieces around those guys, but they never surrounded Durant with a ton of shooters either. They always wanted it to kind of be like this even playing field between everybody. They never wanted it to be like, we're building the team specifically around one guy. And even when Westbrook was here, they altered the style. Get more shots up because you're not a very good shooting team, so you can get more offensive rebounds and more opportunities at making shots. But they never completely went all in the way that the Rockets did. And I think that's a credit to the Rockets more than it's a knock on the Thunder. The Rockets had the foresight to say, look, we're going to break this whole thing down. We're going to scrap the center, and we're just going to play a bunch of wings. And if we're going to die going out playing this breakneck, never-seen-before style so we can maximize the guy who's not a great jump shooter but needs the space. And the Thunder never did that. So you got to give credit to the Rockets. You got to say that the Thunder had some bad luck along the way, and you got to say that the Thunder were also probably a little scared to go all the way in terms of Russell Westbrook.
So, just kind of talking about, we talked a lot about, what that era of Thunder basketball has been with Russ and KD and everybody. What's been the difference from covering them from that time to covering them now with Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and the new faces of the organization now?
I think that like there's a easier kind of vibe in the locker room. Like, I don't know if this group necessarily doesn't – I don't think they go into nights thinking they can't win a championship, but I think there's a different kind of pressure that comes with, a Durant Westbrook team than, the team that the Thunder currently has. The expectations were low for this group. Just outside perceptions. Inside, those guys all want to win championships, obviously, and they drive each other to do so. But every loss with the Thunder, with Durant and Westbrook, or with Westbrook and Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, it seemed like the end of the world. There was a gravity to every single loss or turnover or injury because you felt like these guys had this finite window of time that you had these players that were on this trajectory to be championship players that were playing consistently for championships ever since they got to that first NBA Finals in 2012. This group is just different. You know, you got more younger guys who are kind of just starting their NBA careers. You got Chris Paul in a different place, you know, as a guy who is kind of taking a mentorship role. You know, you got a different mix of guys than you had these guys that were all going for this one championship. And I think that this group is just takes it I don't want to say they don't take it as seriously, but I just think the atmosphere is a little bit more loose than you had in those previous teams. And I think it makes for, you know, a nice change. Most of the Thunder fans I've talked to said they really enjoyed this season. I've enjoyed covering it. I don't know if you guys have been watching it and enjoyed it, but I think it's been a fun team to watch. And it's, you know, it's okay to like different styles of basketball. And that's exactly what we're getting with this version of the Thunder, because we've seen Durant and Westbrook for the first 8 years, and then you saw, you know, Westbrook show for the next 3, and now you've got kind of this just mix of all kinds of different guys coming together to make it work, and, you know, it's fun to me.
Yeah, can you kind of talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a little bit? I know a lot of people knew that he had maybe star potential, but I think even for me seeing him this year, because I guess I didn't watch a lot of Clippers games last year, he's kind of been a little better than I thought he was. I knew he, like I said, he'll be great, but and also he's played a lot at the 2. Do you think the Thunder kind of want to move him back to the 1 eventually? Because even last year with the Clippers with Lou Williams and them, he kind of still kind of played the 2.
Yeah, they think he's a 1, and they want him to be that guy, or they, you know, that's what they say. You know, we'll see what happens in drafts to come, because, you know, you don't really draft for positional need necessarily. You draft the guys that are the best and that are going to fit your team the best. So, you know, if they come across a point guard that they like in the next, you know, 4 to 5 years, maybe that's a guy that they draft. And then, you know, that's kind of the beauty of Shai, is that he's a guy who can play anywhere in the backcourt. He's got a great rebounding rate for a guy that's about 6'5", 6'6". So he almost plays like a small forward in terms of the way he rebounds. He's going to get bigger and stronger defensively to where he can, you know, he can be a stronger defender. Right now they kind of put him off ball, put him on the weak side some. You know, he's going to be a guy that you can be okay taking another team's point guard, or being a guy that can, you know, defend another team's best player in crunch time situations once he gets stronger. Right now he'll get overpowered by guys like Kawhi, but he'll get stronger and he'll get better at that. You know, his touch is wonderful in terms of the mid-range game with his floater. You know, he's kind of got a herky-jerk kind of three-point shot, but it goes in. And I think he'll get better at that too. And I think the biggest thing for him this year is that, and I think it's something to watch once the league restarts, is Chris Paul, just being around him, I think makes you a better basketball player, makes you a smarter basketball player. That's been the most interesting development of this entire season. Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander have a great relationship. And that was something that people weren't sure of when Chris Paul came to Oklahoma City, but they're really like brothers. These guys watch film together. They joke together. They like hang out. So, you know, for that to be a positive relationship is only going to do good things for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because, I mean, you're getting graduate level point guard classes every day. You're working with one of the best ever. And you can't really imagine a better setting for a young guard than to work with a guy like Chris Paul in terms of how to orchestrate a game and think the game. And I think that Shai's got a lot of tools that Chris Paul actually doesn't have. You know, he's got more length. He's got a little bit more shake. He's not super athletic, but he's got a different size factor at that position that's going to give him the ability to do some things that Chris couldn't do in his career. Now imagine putting the kind of mind that Chris has in that body. And, you know, I think that's why the Thunder's really excited about him.
I guess we've been on here for a little bit. I only have one more question for you. You know, just with everything that you talked about just now, what are kind of your expectations for the Thunder moving forward? They've been playing pretty good basketball. You know, what, the 5th seed right now, I believe, or is it 4th?
5th.
They're in the fifth seed right now. They've been playing pretty good basketball. Like, what are your expectations for them? Heading into everything, getting ready to go in Orlando.
Like, this is a real opportunity for them, I think. I think going into the season, they didn't really have any like expectations of being a team that was going to contend for a title, at least internally throughout the organization. Like, don't tell Chris Paul he's not going to play for a title. He wants to play for a title every year. But like, this is an opportunity from the standpoint of you're throwing all these guys in this unfamiliar territory, and the Thunder's been one of the best, I think, situational teams in the league this year in terms of going out on the road, playing in hostile environments. I think they were 20-11 on the road this year. They've won in some really tough places. They don't get rattled by teams, even if a team is better than them. And even if they lose to a team that's better than them, they don't rattle. They're not going to get in the last 5 minutes of a game and start making dumb decisions. It's going to be because the team is just better than them physically, ability-wise, or scheme-wise. It's not going to be because they can't handle the moment. So I think this kind of situation plays to their advantage because they have a guy like Chris Paul. So to me, the expectations kind of go up. If they can come into this 8-game kind of run and be playing well and maybe get, some good basketball going in that 8-game run, it's not necessarily about seeding so much, but playing well, moving the ball, playing good defense, making more three-pointers at a higher clip, because that's one thing that's going to be a weakness for them, is they're a good mid-range team. I think they're the best mid-range shooting team in the league. They're around 47%. But the three-point shot is their weakness. They don't shoot many of them, and they shoot an okay percentage. If they can start to make 2 or 3 more threes a game, that can be the difference between their offense being middle of the pack and being a top 10 offense. And that could be the difference in a playoff series, 2 or 3 threes a game when they're going to be in tight games. So I think that their expectations have actually gotten higher, especially considering a team like Utah lost Bogdanovich. There's some questions about the Clippers in terms of their fit. Harrell's just gone out of the bubble. Now the Thunder are going to have to deal with Dennis Schroeder going out of the bubble once his wife gives birth to their child, which should be in the next probably like 3 or 4 weeks, I think he said. But if they hit kind of a rhythm going into that playoffs, I think that they can be a favorite in a first-round series. And after that, everything's kind of a bonus. But it's all about matchups, man. If they get Denver or Utah, I think they got a shot. If they get Houston or the Clippers, I think it's going to be really hard for them to get out of the first round.
Yeah, I actually got a few more questions for you, but I'm happy you said that because me and Rich kind of talked about that when the schedule came out. I thought the Thunder kind of had a chance coming up. They have a couple big games I was looking at. They play the Nuggets and then they play the Jazz. I think those two would be 2 big games seeding wise coming up. But you talked about Chris Paul and playing for a championship. I know when he first kind of got to the Thunder, a lot of people didn't expect him to stay. And then when he did stay, they said they would probably be there for a little bit, see how he plays, and the championship contender probably come along. With how everything's worked out, do you think maybe he considers staying a little longer, or you think eventually he still gets traded off to a championship contender?
I think he's going to have 2 years on his contract left after this season, and it would be in the Thunder's best interest and probably Chris's best interest in terms of winning a championship to get traded now rather than into the last year of his contract, because his value is never going to be higher. Everybody was expecting that contract to kind of depreciate terribly. It was people were talking about that being one of the worst contracts in the league when he got traded to the Thunder. But, Westbrook has a comparable contract and he's got 1 more year on it. So Chris Paul's contract has actually kind of gained a little bit of value based on how he's played and his ability to stay healthy. He's one of the guys who's probably benefited more from the layoff than anybody because he hasn't had to grind through 20 more games of the regular season. He's had 4 months to kind of, stay healthy, stay out of harm's way. He always gets hurt at least once a year. And this is the first year in 3 or 4 years he hasn't gotten hurt. So I don't know what Chris's thought is. I know he's enjoyed this season. I don't know if he's adamant about staying in Oklahoma City because he thinks that they can win a title in the next 2 years of his contract. I don't think the Thunder can in the next 2 years of his contract just based on what's around them in the league. So I would think it would probably be in their best interest to try and seek a trade this summer. But I know the Thunder's not going to be sad if he comes back for another year. Now, I don't know how Chris is going to feel about that. He might want to go get after a title, or go get to a team that's going to help him win, like a Miami, to kind of put them over the top in the East. Maybe Philly's that team, because they're still trying to figure out their fit with Embiid and Simmons. I think the Lakers would be the ideal fit for him with LeBron, because he's friends with LeBron and his family lives in Los Angeles. But the Lakers just have so little to give in terms of a trade that it's not going to be possible to make that trade work. So the options are going to be the things to watch. If the options present themselves, I think that's when the Thunder says, okay, maybe this is the time, because the Thunder's not going to make a deal that they're not like 100% comfortable with, whether they feel like it's time to trade Chris or not.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of wanted to get into your time at the Athletic. Now, I know you say you kind of been there for a year, but as I was telling you before, I read the Athletic kind of heavy. I have a year subscription with you guys, and I just wonder what's been the difference between going from the Oklahoman to the Athletic, where you're kind of going from writing game stories maybe to now writing the longer stories, maybe feature stories, and kind of not writing like every day.
Yeah, that's like the big challenge is trying to find the thing that's going to hit a little more home than your traditional gamer. The biggest thing has been, being more of a kind of digital collaborator rather than a face-to-face collaborator, because I had such a good working family at the Oklahoman where I was going to an office regularly. I was talking to people. We had a team of people covering games, columnists and photographers and editors that we would all collaborate with every day. I had great podcast partners over those years. And that's something that is a little bit more remote when you're talking about the Athletic, because you're kind of on an island. I mean, you've got a great team of people that are digital. We're on Slack every day, and we're sending emails and stuff, and we're talking to each other on Twitter, and we've got some of the best writers in the world. But it's a little bit different because you don't have people that you're with going to lunch with every day, and you're going out after the game and getting a drink with or something like that. So that was a really key part for me when I was at the Oklahoman, because it was a real family. And that's what was the hardest part about leaving. But the Athletic's a great place to work, man. They care about the people they have there, and they support us, like they give us all the bandwidth we need to be able to pursue the stories we want to. And I think that that's been the biggest thing for me, and that's what's made this year so rewarding, is that I've got a company that supports me, and they also support the work that I want to do without a ton of pressure, which has been really nice, and I think is welcoming for a lot of guys that come to the Athletic from like a traditional paper.
Yeah, definitely. Has anything changed about maybe the way you go about things? I know since you're not writing game stories and stuff like that, do you still go to every game? Do you still go to every practice? Or?
Yeah, I go to every game. I try to make every practice. I've had a couple of games here and there. I don't go to all the road games, and having my son earlier this year, I took some time to stay home. Excuse me, which the Athletic was great about, and I didn't travel with the team for a few weeks, just so I could be home and just kind of help be there for him. But I try to be there just as I would when I was working for the Oklahoman. It's still a daily job, and you still want to be present and, making sure you're keeping those relationships stable with people. It's just more kind of working behind the scenes and working more to develop the away from the team relationships more. And I think that's been a big plus for working for the Athletic, is I've gotten to seek relationships with people I otherwise wouldn't have had the time to, because I was worried about a deadline, or I was worried about getting something in before the buzzer. Like, the deadlines got harder and harder as time went on with the Oklahoman, and no fault to the people that I worked with, but just, the process of the paper and kind of the changes that the paper was going through at the time. It got to be where I think the quality of the work was suffering. And now, you kind of get to make different relationships you didn't get to before. And I think that that's helped some of the the quality of my writing in terms of the knowledge that I have and what I'm able to put into it and how I'm able to report authoritatively on my beat because I'm afforded that extra time. It's been invaluable, and that's kind of been a big difference.
Yeah. You talked about your time podcasting. I know you did the Thunder Buddies podcast, and I think when I started listening to, I think Darnell Mayberry had it, and Anthony
Yeah.
Slater, and then you. So, do you plan on getting back into podcasting? Is that something you're still interested in?
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that I wasn't able to do it this year, and that's kind of my fault. I kind of let the ball drop on that, but it's something I'll probably get into in the future. I'm not exactly sure when. But it's something I want to do. This first year, it was good for me to not do it because it helped me to be able to kind of focus more on the writing and kind of helping to talk to people more behind the scenes rather than having to worry about banging out a podcast every night, which was helpful to me when I was doing the Thunder Buddies podcast, but it also takes up a lot of time. So it's something I'd like to get back into eventually. I'm just not going to put like a solid date on it because I think I just end up disappointing people right now. So I gotta assess some things first before I make any commitments to get back into it.
All right. Yeah. I got one last question for you. I know you kind of just moved to Athletic. You've been covering the Thunder for a while. Do you have any, I guess, like any plans for like yourself? Do you want to continue covering the NBA? Do you maybe want to move to a different sport? Maybe move to a different, like cover a different team? Maybe go back home towards New Orleans? Do you have anything, I guess, like future plans, or are you just kind of taking it day by day?
I enjoy what I do. When I have those plans, you'll be the first to know, man, because right now I think we're in such kind of like a volatile time that it's difficult for us to really say where we're going to be tomorrow, let alone in a couple of years. And that's why, it's kind of why I was excited to do this with you guys, because I applaud you guys being, keeping at it and being ambitious throughout the pandemic, because I know a lot of my coworkers, myself, a lot of people in the business have been really down, and we provide people an escape and a service by doing this. And just because something gets thrown off a little bit doesn't mean that you can't still stay on your grind too. And it's important that you guys show people that. It's important that we continue to do what we do, because I think that it gives people not only an outlet but an inspiration. So you guys are doing what y'all are supposed to be doing, and I commend you for it. So like, I went off on a tangent. I was supposed to be talking about my future. I don't know the future, man. I'm not sure just yet. I'm loving my son. He's growing in front of my eyes. He's a beautiful boy. I'm loving the job I do. I love coming on podcasts and talking about basketball and life and everything. So like, this is great for me, and I'm glad you guys are doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we definitely appreciate you for coming on. I'm definitely going to be sending you some emails, talk about some Thunder, because I got a lot of things to say, being a fan and all that.
Yeah, man, no problem.
Yeah, we want to thank you again for coming on, man. We really appreciate this. Just congratulations on the birth of your son. I don't know, you said six months old now.
Yeah, he's great, man. He's a beautiful kid. It's been a good year for me, man. I cannot complain, even though we have this pandemic and we're not able to be at the games. Like, if I were to complain, man, that would be the worst thing in the world, man, because this has been such a great year for me personally and career-wise. So like, it's been awesome.
Great, man. So yeah, it's Rich, it's Kayson, it's Erik Horne. This was the rundown. We'll see you guys next time.